Hello, everybody. Jacek Bartosiak is speaking. Strategy and Future. Today with me is Velina Tchakarova from Vienna. Hi, Velina. How are you?
Hello, it's great to see you again, and thank you for having me.
Velina is one of my favorite interlocutors on my podcast. Yeah, a famous geopolitician from Vienna. Classic geopolitics. We always have common language to talk, and we are recording this conversation on the 23rd of November 2022, and a lot of stuff to cover. So let's get started. Velina, what do you think about a few developments that occurred over the last several weeks? First of all, how do you see the conduct of war in Ukraine in terms of the Ukrainian counteroffensives, how they are viewed in Austria and elsewhere in Europe, across the continental Europe, especially in the context of the two worlds that we had discussed prior to recording, that there is this world in the Western Europe that don't see too much into this intermarium thing, Polish-Ukrainian relationship, the center of gravity moving to the east, and there is the second reality in Warsaw and in Kiev, talking about the military alliance, discussing about the adjustments of NATO, either to include Ukraine or create a new security architecture closely tied to NATO, but between Poland and Ukraine, with the resolution of the question of Belarus. How do you reconcile those two approaches? And I know you've been tracking them. So if you just could elaborate on that, Marina.
Yes, I think that 9 months after beginning of the war, we are already in this bifurcation scenario here on the old continent. Maybe some of your audience know about my thesis on the bifurcation of the global system centered
They do.
around US-China decoupling. So decoupling going forward on both sides simultaneously. And I argue that this bifurcation has arrived on the old continent as well, affecting future coalitions between European powers. Now, we remember very well that before the war began, there was a rapprochement by France and Germany with Russia. In fact, Germany and France wanted to normalize relations for the sake of this global power competition and specifically for the sake of positioning Europe in Asia. So, of course, a lot has changed, and the French-German approach moved forward, but there is still I think, a lack of understanding of the complexity and specifically a lack of vision how to move forward. What do I mean by that? I still see a lot of European stakeholders, and when I say European stakeholders, of course, I don't mean Central Eastern European countries. I specifically mean the core of the European integration project, mostly in the west of Europe. So I still see, sorry, European stakeholders um, struggling with the idea that Russia may lose and Ukraine may win this war. And because of that, there are also no tangible plans how to deal with the future, with
Yeah,
the scenario when Ukraine wins the war. So I don't also see any sense of urgency. And this is my second problem, next to the first huge problem that there are no tangible plans being developed how to, engage with Ukraine in the future once Ukraine wins the war, how to create political and military alliances, and how to launch security guarantees, all of this package. But the second big problem that I see next to the one is also there is no idea, no vision that Russia, the Russian Federation, may also start dissolving. So they still, I think, deal with the idea that no matter how the war outcome will be, there will still be a Russia in a similar format that they will have to deal with.
mm,
And this is, I think, quite troubling.
yeah, not only troubling, but it doesn't reflect reality. And this is what I call the mutiny of the Eastern Peripheria. Uh, it's good that we speak English to the English language audience, including across Europe. Western Europe so that they understand what is, boiling, here in Warsaw, in Kiev. There is a great feeling of moving the center of gravity to the east of the European politics, especially security architecture. Because with the victory of the Ukrainian army at the outskirts of Kiev, and then Kherson and Izium and Kupchansk and elsewhere, Ukraine has become a security architecture sort of subject, which means that in order to prevent war on the continent, you need to account the Europeans, the Ukrainians into the game, and the Poles. And either the NATO will adjust, and the Western Europeans will reckon with that, and the NATO will adjust. Americans are thinking how to adjust to that, either to include Ukraine, which is a risky proposition, or create a sort of a side framework for Poland and Ukraine having a military alliance or some sort. Yeah, and there is a debate already in Poland going on about it, and Ukraine's reached out to us to discuss that. And this is a game changer. Imagine what Germans are thinking about this with their continental game to include Russia, energy policy, division of labor in Central and Eastern Europe, what it means for France with the grand vision of, Northern Eurasia from Vladivostok to Lisbon and, market and the security buffer from China. This is a complete demolition of that. And I have had several conversations with Ukrainian, officials and thinkers over the last couple of weeks about it. And this way, we are restoring the geopolitical order that had existed in this part of the world since the Middle Ages up to the modern times, up to the partitions of the old Commonwealth, including Poland, Lithuania. And because security supersedes. So we need to create new security architecture, based on a new real balance of power as an outcome of this war. And it's possible that Ukrainians will win this war. However, we will define whether this will be to include Crimea or the Donbass. And there is a great chance that Russia might collapse. And this is in the interest of Poland and Ukraine. And if the Germans will try to, interfere with this process, there will be a mutiny on the eastern periphery. It's because this is national interest number one, much bigger than being part of, this German-oriented economic framework.
I need to unpack two important things from what you've said, which I think are very important for the audience who hasn't been following into much detail. The first being the European security architecture. Now, people need to understand that on the 24th of February, not only Ukraine was attacked, and it was not only the goal of complete political, economic, societal subjugation of Ukraine on Russia's agenda, but Russia started also the non-kinetic war against the European security order. Non-kinetic in a sense that in an interconnected world, you have a plethora of geoeconomic means to wage a war against a competitor. And this is what began. So on the 24th of February, the European security order was completely destroyed, which explains also what you've outlined, how now a new security architecture is emerging in the east of Europe out of this geopolitical vacuum, which is a natural phenomenon because, yes, nature abhors a vacuum and power does so as well. So because there is no security architecture and because the Western powers are still waiting for a final outcome, and it may last, we are right now in a scenario of war of attrition, which is also the reason why Ukraine is eager to continue the war, and why Russia, in fact, is eager to start any fake peace talks and to present itself as this rational actor that now seeks peace, and to present Ukraine as the irrational actor that wants a war. So this is important to understand, and this is my second biggest sorrow for the moment. I'm really concerned that I don't see this sense of urgency among European decision makers in some of these European capitals, that there is a war going on also against Europe for the moment, that this war entails, of course, the information warfare. We in the Central Europe and Eastern Europe understand what information warfare means. I don't need to explain that. But next to information war, the whole package of nuclear blackmail, the food, the fertilizers, the energy weapons. So this is a package that has been carefully prepared for the last 8 years, and they have been waiting for the right timing to start this. The right timing was, in fact, already here at the end of last year because of the geoeconomic environment. So it was really the perfect moment for Russia to strike, but not just to strike against Ukraine. So they really want this security order destroyed, because in a new concert of powers, in a chaotic concert of powers, like in the 19th century, they will easily operate while engaging exactly with those European powers that will be open for penetration.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, you touched upon a very important subject, being mental maps of the Western Europeans. They were formed and forged in the Napoleonic Wars, in modern times of the Industrial Revolution, in the 19th century, going forward into the 20th century, where Russia was a great stakeholder in European security architecture, providing masses of troops for the balancing game of either, depending on times, either France or England or Bismarckian Germany. And Russia was there, always was there with this mass conscription, masses of troops, always a formidable security player. It has ended. It has ended for many reasons, including the evolution of the battlefield, their demography, their backwardness, and their losses in Ukraine. And that's why there is the rise of the old geopolitical concept of the intermarium between the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea. And this is in the hearts of Poles and Ukrainians. Ukrainians now, Poles since ever. And that's something that, for the German mind, which is so much aligned with the thinking of, the supply chains, economic order, manufacturing, and division of labor in Central Eastern Europe, it's a strange concept. I mean, alien concept. They don't get it.
But at the same time, it does not contradict the concept of supply chains reconfiguration, given the fact that Russia also sought to position itself at the forefront of the systemic competition between the United States and China. It was not just about Europe and not just about Ukraine. First and foremost, it was about Ukraine. It was always about Ukraine, but it was also, like I said, about, positioning itself against the status quo powers and creating chaos on the old continent so that you can operate easily with those European, specifically the smaller ones that were trying also to play off the bigger European powers against each other, like the Hungarian case, obviously. But it was also about US and China. It was also about the bifurcation. And we need to understand that China, that in this specific global context, a transitionary period of international relations, Russia made a choice. Russia sided with China beforehand.
Yes, of course.
Because it sided with China, it decided that these 25 years of investments, of corrupting European politicians, of buying up economic and political and corporate leverage on the old continent, is worth cutting off, because otherwise it doesn't make sense from Russian point of view to really launch a full-scale war instead of, let's say, limited military operation and say, I'm ready to get rid of all of this
But
leverage?
I simply think that the Germans, for the sake of example, because for Poles it's always about the German making coal in the EU. It was supposed to work in a different way. The Russians presented themselves as, of course, security provider to the European peninsula, and they wanted to improve their negotiating positions by a quick victory over Ukraine and creating a new status quo. But at the end of the day, I think Russians wanted to be part of the European project, but as a security provider, as a major stakeholder in the security in the European project. And that was the dream of the French and German elites, I guess, to have this Northern Eurasian marketplace and security buffer from China. And the problem is that it was those intermarim countries of Central and Eastern Europeans that were in the way, and of course the U.S. power in Europe. And this is what the war is all about.
I argue that it was even a bigger goal. Of course, if it had failed, it would have presented it like that, controlling the flows of goods and services coming from Asia towards Europe, because Russia would have become this big gate next to Turkey. So the terrestrial gate of controlling the flows of goods and services, Mackinder, Russia would have been this gate from both sides, Europe and China. But I argue that Russia, in fact, by launching a full-scale war and becoming this junior partner of China, as this is now the main thesis, like, okay, Russia would be the junior partner of China. So what? I say, as a junior partner, you can create so much damage. Because for China, it is a good thing that Russia keeps the Europeans and the Americans busy, while it is preparing for the big competition in the Indo-Pacific. So, in a sense, a junior partner that creates a carnage and shuffles the whole power dynamics in Europe is in fact a worst case scenario for us. So I argue that Russia saw France and Germany as the status quo powers, and Russia, being this revisionist imperialist power, wanted even more out of this. And that is, I think, the main reason why they said, okay, we are not going to do just this limited thing and then trying to subjugate Ukraine in stages, like stage after stage. But we will do an all-in move, and we want to know now. Now is the time. Now is the perfect timing for us.
But the Ukrainians and the effort of their military changed the game.
Exactly. And now this is I think the most worrisome bifurcation of all the bifurcations that I named is the one that right now Central and Eastern European countries, together with Ukraine, because we are still in the scenario of Ukraine winning the war, like you pointed out, Ukraine wins the war. For that, it needs the heavy weapon systems. And here we see again the dilemma. Instead of delivering as much as possible, Germany is still being cautious, and they can deliver more, but because, as I said, they are in this dilemma: what if Russia loses and Ukraine wins, and they don't have a vision for the future of the security order? And there are also political gambles at home. You need to understand that most of the dynamics are in domestic politics dynamics, like all the status quo approach, right, is also quite relevant for the way how the German government is trying to stabilize itself as a coalition government, and how it's trying to serve the interests of its own population first and foremost. But the most worrisome bifurcation I see is the one that has a lot to do with what you described, that there is going to be an Anglosphere Central Eastern European security bloc. Security comes first, economics comes second. Derived from the security bloc, there will be also reconfiguration of the supply chains, north-south, and then via north-south, of course, the maritime lines, because US is a rim power, and together with the Brits. And here the question is, what are the French and the Germans doing? How will the German-French engine of the European integration come up with similarly tangible plan to engage with
Yeah,
the continent. What is the plan for security order? Because if they don't come up with a plan, or if they don't join, then we have the big division lines,
true.
biggest division line between the European NATO members.
True, and Poland's debate is growing up, is really getting hotter and hotter because we have been suspecting Germany of cheating both on you know their social contract is based on things that are right away gone, cheap energy from China, from Russia, and cooperation with China,
Cheap
and
manufacturing
access,
from China. Yes.
yes, and access to cheap labor, relatively cheap labor from Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern European, and this is unsustainable. The Americans will push hard against the Germans, and I still think that Germans are hedging. They hedge because maybe Russia will win. Maybe Russia will not be defeated entirely. Maybe we will have access to cheap energy again. Maybe US will lose with China. Maybe Central Europeans will come to their senses and they'll come back asking for help because we run the European Union, and they try to hedge to protect their social contract. This very delicate balance between the capital, the model of economy, labor, and the political life, yeah, which is at stake. And so the German question is again at the center of the future of Europe. However it sounds, what Germans will do will be a defining factor, and more so, we have one fear, because you are very much right that we want to have this north and south. We want to recreate the supply chains in line with our interests. We want to have a military alliance with probably with Ukraine, and an adjustment of the Anglo-Saxon sphere to expand NATO or at least create a new framework. That's why we are investing in military. We want to feel the robust force. That's why we invest in the nuclear energy from United States, yeah? Very recently, since we last talked. So these are the plans. We want to go the independent path. At the end of the day, we ran this damn old Commonwealth. So in the East, so people in the West forgot it. So that's the case. But we fear in Warsaw, and I wonder what you think about it, that because the U.S.-China rift is all about economy and technology, and this is a very fierce competition, and the Chinese have arguments there. And at the end of the day, Germany is a economic powerhouse of Europe, and also in a way technology. So the Americans will need Germany at the end of the day anyway, and they will need to pay Germany for that, to create incentives for Germany to really ally with the US in this deglobalization thing, decoupling thing. And this will be at the cost of the Central and Eastern Europeans and the Intermarium, and the Germans. Some parts of the German, establishment already is playing towards this sort of the deal, to the detriment, of course, of Poland and Ukraine in a way. But the challenge that the US is facing is so huge that the US will need to make this concession. So what do you think about this?
Yes, it is possible because the United States are already in the position of forging alliances and partnerships. They cannot do it on their own in this big decoupling context in which we are. As you said, political economy, fourth industrial revolution, the technological decoupling. Then it is a lot about security and defense pacts, as we saw with Australia joining the AUKUS. There will be more of this.
World Ocean Alliance, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and then it is, of course, also about the ideological component. How are you going to project standards, norms, regulations? And in this big game, you will need the power of the institutional actor, that is the European Union. And who is behind it? That is Germany, and France. And because France is this European Indo-Pacific nation, that you will also need for the sake of engaging with partners and allies. So the Americans cannot do it on their own. And here the question, that's why it's a question mark, because I have no answer for you. The question mark, once the competition becomes overt one, And we saw already, even during Biden's administration, that they mean it. All the expectations for normalization of the relation with China, because both would be interested in, calming
Chips Act
down the
is a
economy.
really is a big thing.
The CHIPS Act, so for our audience, this is practically a war on semiconductors.
Yeah.
This is serious. And by the way, inflation has a lot to do exactly with this decoupling and with the reconfiguration of supply chains, because building supply chains is costly, and is a costly process that takes a lot of time, 10, 15, 20 years. You cannot do it by scratch. So that means that they will engage and they will start asking questions. The Americans will start asking questions. We were there for you in Europe. In fact, I argue that Ukraine would have lost the war at the beginning if it were not for the Americans, if the Americans had not started supplying right from the beginning, plus the push that came from Central and Eastern European countries. You need to do that. So they started also doing that. This was the push that came. This was a necessary condition, plus, of course, the sufficient condition coming from the Ukrainians, the will to fight, and the will to sacrifice, and so on. So there will be a tough question coming from the Americans at some point of time. We were there for you. We need you now. Where are you in this game? Because the game that Europe is playing right now is oscillating between the two. That means not taking sides. We are the strategic partner of America, but yes, we are also looking at China as a partner, as an economic competitor, and as a systemic rival, right? So we are in this scenario at institutional level. We don't have an institutional agreement because the CAI, the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, failed. We don't have a framework for the relations of 27 members with China. And China, being this economic giant, will, of course, always have an overweight in the relations with the majority of the countries because they don't have the tools to deal with China. And you see what was happening with Germany and France. France proposed to Germany to go together to Beijing, and it did not happen. So it is obvious. That right now both France and Germany are struggling to somehow arrange the relationship for the time being. But sooner or later, and I argue this is coming, they will be confronted with either or choice. And I don't have an answer for you how they will deal with it once they are confronted with the choice. I know for sure that Central and Eastern European countries will be like, no, it's really a matter of security first, and we will side with America because America is our security guarantor. And then, they will deviate and will try to.
And the Germans will try to impose on us through the Brussels EU institutions, and try to sort of leverage their position there if we do not comply with their expectations. And I'm telling you, this will be a major showdown because Polish government will not back down on that.
Unless then there is this tough choice being made that the European Union and the United States initiate a kind of institutional cooperation, because this is also a possibility under the scenario of a democratic administration in 2024. We know for sure from the time of Obama, when Obama was also decoupling, that they go for this institutional approach. So we may see also a push towards TTIP. This was the practically the trade agreement between United States and the European Union. This will go also in the technological domain. This is also a possibility to say we need a legal framework with the Americans. We create a free trade area between America and the European Union, and then you enable all this flow of semiconductors, investments, and so on and so forth. Because you're right. I mean, the German companies already started moving to the United States. Look at the automobile industry. For the sake of energy bills and for the sake of lack of unions, cheap labor, and so on and so forth. This will enable, of course, European companies to to survive and to flourish within this alternative network that the United States is creating. So I think this may be one possibility, splitting of roles. Practically, you have the Central Eastern Europeans being in charge for security, because you will need a cordon sanitaire to prevent any Russian
Macindarian words.
to
Velina,
prevent
much
Russian
appreciated.
future Russian threats,
Yeah,
because no matter what kind of Russia it will be, the next European security order will be not with Russia
yeah.
or with or without Russia, but it will be despite Russia, despite the existence of Russia.
And that's why we need a balancing coalition of the intermarium countries to really create a deterrence force. And we
Yes.
are contemplating that in Warsaw and Kiev together. We are two anchors of the system.
And the geo-economic side will be covered by the Franco-German regime, so to say, in such scenario in which there will be a further integration between America and Europe. This is, I think, the only way forward for to prevent the bifurcation. If we allow a bifurcation, if we say, let's split the European Union because we don't see our security being covered by, let's say, by a common security and defense policy, the European Union is too slow with all these defense initiatives. I think that this will be damaging for all of the Europeans. A bifurcation of the old continent means that our enemies and competitors will always find it easier to penetrate and to play us off against each other. And this is probably the thing that we should be aware of, to not go into these conflicting lines, but to try to merge the positions and to try to split the roles. We do not need all of the 27 doing everything together, because obviously Poland has more understanding about security and can, for instance, initiate this pact. I also think that Ukraine will be integrated not just in the European Union, but in fact into the transatlantic pact. This is the only way forward for Ukraine to survive in this new environment. At the very same time, you have the big European powers in the West that can still forge these trade agreements, not only with the United States, but also with the world, because we will need India, we will need ASEAN, we will need to survive as a trading bloc as well. This is where our power comes from.
Yeah, true. Velina, we need to talk in the near future. Apparently, a lot of things are happening, but that would be good for today. Thank you. Velina Tchakarova was my guest. Thank you, Velina, very much. And you stay with us at Strategy and Future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.